The question that I would encourage people to ask themselves is, what kind of government is that modeling, where the privileged gather their resources and redistribute them across the masses?
Are we talking about socialism?
I would describe it as a democratized economy.
And democratic socialism?
No, just the economy. And socialism isn't just like an economic proposition.
Okay, you're not pushing socialism on me, are you?
I firmly stand by us democratizing our economy. Here in Minneapolis, the initial impact of an act of terror or an act of war is the violence, but what's left over is what makes it really hard for communities to recuperate. If you have coded an economic safety net so that people can benefit from it no matter what happens, it essentially says we're a little bit better protected, we're more resilient and more durable.
We're rolling! We're rolling!
Calling out cat people. This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
We are back on the Wedge Live podcast, and I'm here with José Antonio Zayas Cabán, the man with 4 names, executive director of Our Streets Minnesota. I'm losing track of what the organization is called anymore. Do you still use the Minnesota?
Our Streets.
Just Our Streets?
Yep.
Okay. Used to be Bicycle Coalition, then it was Our Streets Minneapolis, then it was Our Streets Minnesota. Was it ever Our Streets Minnesota?
No.
Oh, was that just the domain name?
Just the domain name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Glad we resolved that. Thank you for inviting us into your home.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's nice to have you here, and of course, with the circumstances, this is a little more comfortable and a little more safe.
Yeah. First, the breaking news is that Our Streets, Open Streets, is coming back. The version that is hosted by your organization.
Yep, absolutely. So we announced it on the 19th of February that we are coming back, and we intend to do 2 events, one on Lindale in June and the Cedar Fest event on Cedar Riverside in September. So we're really excited to be back and bring it back.
Sorry.
Oh, good.
If this was remote, I could cut my audio entirely, but I'm bleeding over into yours. Has the city awarded these officially?
So these events we are doing without applying for the city RFP, and
Fascinating.
we've fundraised for them independently.
You still need to get like the regular event permits though, right?
Yeah, we still have to go through Bessie and get the closure, the same old things, and then we have to walk down the corridor and get the approvals from the entities along the corridor. And we've been meeting with some partners prior to the announcement to get that process going. So we didn't apply. We're not applying for the city RFP. These are our events, and we're going to be doing them in partnership with the community. And we're excited to have 2, and especially to have Lindale in June, which typically would have fallen in June in the past. And I've always personally felt like the event series, in its let's say in an eventuality where it's really successful, could be the other strong bookend to the state fair. Mm-hmm. You know, as sort of a summer kickoff event, not just in Minneapolis, but like for the region. It can bring in, obviously not the amount of people that the state fair brings in, but unique to the Open Streets event series, there's no entry fee. Like you can literally just walk to the corridor and have fun without $1 in your pocket. And you know, so that's something that I think we're always thinking about. And then the other piece too is, especially this year with everything that's been happening in the city, I think it's important to uplift our streets, the businesses along the corridor, give people a positive reason to gather around, or just organize in general and be together, because, you know, many people have been isolating or staying at home. They're afraid to go out. Their experiences are very different. So our hope is to to successfully put something on that feels restorative and feels uplifting, and can have a positive impact on the business community there in the corridors.
So the city does provide funding to these, the ones that they sponsor, right? So you'd be foregoing that by not participating in the RFP. Is there a downside to have, this is a big middle finger to the city. Is there bad blood here? What's going on?
No, I mean, I think it's still kind of harkening back to the situation when we parted ways, which is that it takes more funding than what the city is assembling for these events.
But you could take that, put it in your pocket and say, we're going to use this, and then we're going to go above and beyond. So you're at a little bit of a deficit by saying we're not even going to take any money. Does that money come with strings that you're trying to avoid, or what? Why not ask for the money?
I haven't really looked through the contract in a while. Obviously, there are some strings within the RFP process, but I think the other piece is about just how we want to present the event as an organization. So, for example, one of the things that came up during the city RFP process, I don't know if it's still the case, is that I think one organizer could do up to 2 events. And we just want to get back to a situation where we're doing multiple events across the year. We don't want to be limited by that. The other is the planning process. Really, Open Streets, when we were doing it in coordination with the city, it takes us many more months than the RFP allows to be able to assemble that. Ideally, it's a process that we would start the fall before the year of the events.
Yeah, it does seem like it happens so late and so soon before the events, and I don't know why do it that way and not just award these the year before.
Yeah, so Open Streets Minneapolis for us means something different in how we want to execute the events and how we want to run the events and what we want the events to mean and do for the community. And so there may be a situation, and I'm hopeful, where the city assembles enough funding for them to be supported in the way that we want to do the events. And at that point, we'd be excited to go back and into that partnership. Similarly, there is a possibility, and we're going to continue to work towards it, of us doing an event in St. Paul as early as this summer, maybe next year. So we want to grow Open Streets into St. Paul, and eventually, if there are other opportunities, to take it to other places across the state.
Would that be in partnership with the city of St. Paul, or just an event you decide to do on your own?
It depends on how they respond. We've reached out to the city of St. Paul, and we are hoping to get some time with them to see, and we're going to invite decision makers to come to the events to get a feel for them here on Lindell and Cedar Fest. But whatever way we can produce them, we're going to give it a shot.
Do you know if the city's plan was to do Lindale Open Streets? Is it possible we have 2 Lindale Open Streets this year? The one you do and one done by, I think the Uptown Association hosted the one last year, which really pissed me off because they're the most hostile possible organization to everything that the event is supposed to stand for and has stood for. The hosting organization is against all those things, and that kind of made me mad. But I still went and participated. Are you mad, Jose, that I was still going to Open Streets, even though you weren't involved?
No, I mean, we respect the city's decision to continue to put on events. As far as Open Streets Minneapolis goes, what we're planning to do is what we feel is both up to our standard and the way we want to deliver them. Within the RFP, I believe the city proposes routes that applicants can select and apply to host. So I suppose there is a reality where somebody might apply for Lindale, although there are many other corridors in there. So there is technically a possibility.
I'm hoping for dueling Open Streets is what I'm hoping for.
So
same day, same corridor,
right,
and you battle it out on the street.
One side of the street for one or the other, right? But mostly, I mean, we're just really excited to do it. It's something that we've missed doing it, and there's a longer road when you have to do the fund development yourself, but there's also a lot of flexibility in being able to do it.
Well, I hope the city feels bad for throwing you under the bus for so many years. It's good to have you back. So how are you, Jose? This is a terrible, terrible time in our country and in our city. How are you doing?
I think the operative word is well, and at the same time, you know, the stress level goes up and down depending on what's happening. You know, like here in North Minneapolis, we did see someone get shot in the leg a few blocks here from the house. There's obviously some amount of presence on a regular basis, or there was more so here in the neighborhood. You know, and personally, you think about your physical safety. You start making different choices about protecting yourself, or, you know, staying at home more. For myself, for example, as a daily outdoor runner, I've chosen not to do that, and I have some companionship, you know, when I'm moving around from one place to the other, sort of a buddy system to make sure.
Do you make sure you're not going anyplace alone?
Basically, yeah, and traveling and being outside much less so. But I think, you know, I think about the bigger picture too. Being in advocacy is something that, you know, gives you the privilege of looking at the landscape and asking yourself the question of what can I do in a personal capacity, and how to get plugged in, or also help other people get plugged in with the information or the resources or the kind of people that might help them uplift an effort. So that has been, whether it's a mutual aid runs or rental assistance, fundraising. There's even an effort out there for some traffic calming measures, which would of course impact both the community who's trying to use their streets, but, you know, the agency's ability to use some more of those.
Are we talking about the trash barricades?
I guess so, yeah. I haven't seen the results of it. But, you know,
the results of it is the city going out to disassemble everyone's trash barricade.
Yeah. At the same time, you know, I am part of a community, whether you want to think about it as Puerto Rican, Latin American, brown people, that has been impacted by other forms of violence and oppression and suppression. So, you know, there's already an existing awareness. It's not like I didn't go out with an armor before. You know, the face of of who's, you know, bringing the harm into the community and the intensity of it has changed. But this is something that I always would think about if I go out on a run and I see police officers or county sheriffs. And then I think that's gradually transitioned into trying to find ways to get more focused on what I can do. I think there's always that possibility of becoming paralyzed, you know, not doing anything or not knowing what to do, and just trying to find ways to stay proactive and be supportive and do my part or whatever.
Obviously, you're a U.S. citizen.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason you should. We're going after the worst of the worst, Jose, is what I've been told. You've avoided living your life in a normal way, and like I feel like the news coverage has hinted at this, that this is a problem. Mm-hmm. But there's so many like horror stories to tell of people who've been like hauled off and flown to Texas, separated from their family, had children put into prison camps. But like, there's a lot of people who aren't hurting in that way, but have had their lives like upended and made to fear their own government over the last several months.
I think, so I would say, from my perspective, there's of course no comparison. I consider myself very privileged as a Puerto Rican. We are natural born citizens, and in an instance where, you know, might get boxed in or stopped, that might be the end of it. I've anecdotally heard of a few Puerto Ricans being detained over the last few months through that part of the community. Yeah, if I can talk about gaps of awareness, I do think that one that is really important to me, speaking to what you're saying, to anyone who is interested, a great book to read is Todd Miller's Empire of Borders. It's not a new book, but it He is a reporter that has focused on border technology, these agencies, and the way he conceptualizes it, I think, is really important. That the United States border doesn't start at the Mexico and United States border. It's much farther south. It's in Guatemala. It's in Puerto Rico. It's in Tel Aviv. And so he follows the industrial complex and sort of like where the funding took him to places where, and when I say Tel Aviv, I mean it. ICE is a global entity, and so is DHS. And there's an interview that I can share the link with you that he recently did with Democracy Now! With the person's name is Jen Budd, who's a former agent who sort of defected because of all of these things that have happened while she was working for the agency. I think there's a lack of awareness of how large the apparatus is. I think there's also a lack of awareness of how self-governed they are, because they're technically able to investigate themselves, and that's part of the reason why they prevent law enforcement from spilling into their scenes. And I think there's a lack of awareness of how normal what it is they do here is, and the way they do it in the US and Mexico border. I think about people who are detained in a way, and that book really presents it in this way as test subjects for border technology. And he, in his book, talks about going to an expo, I don't remember where I think it was the Israeli government or the IDF adjacent folks, during this expo, they have border technology that says field tested, and we know who that tech is being tested on. And so I think that's one part in terms of the lack of awareness, that this has nothing to do with lack of training or expediting the process through which they enter the agency. This is something that has existed for decades. And Jen, in her interview with Democracy Now!, she describes the US-Mexico border as a graveyard. This is something that has impacted tens of thousands of lives that have been lost. What I think is a little bit different is the cultural clash of an agency that's used to working in a much different environment coming to an urban environment. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. So I really encourage everyone to read that book and all of his other books related to that. And I think Jen Budd is part of a documentary that's on HBO that focuses on a particular case that was investigated. Someone was murdered by the agency. On the other side, I think this is also critically important, that our resiliency is only as good as our economic safety and security. So when you talk about staying at home and how it's affected our lives, if you think about it from the perspective of accessing employment, or if you're a business owner, things like groceries, healthcare, and I think it speaks to something that I can relate to from my own perspective, having been in Puerto Rico and having observed hurricanes go through the island. We focus on the aftermath as the results of the event itself, but in reality, our immigrant community members or BIPOC community members have always been under economic duress, and when these things happen, they just become worse. So it almost highlights what was missing already, which is that they really haven't had great access to capital to start their businesses. They don't have access to the kind of employment and wages that they need to be economically safe and secure. These kinds of things are exacerbated when these events take place because they can't afford to be away from work. And so that's on top of the racial profiling and the violence that we're describing, but that's oftentimes how war works out, which is that the violent event, which is what's most covered and grabs the most attention, is then followed by a famine. It's followed by starvation. It's followed by sickness. And we have sort of a micro version of the kind of imperialism the U.S. has taken abroad to many countries since the beginning of this country's history. There's a term that I think a French author uses. It's called the imperial boomerang. And I've been reading about this because I follow authors who sort of collect this kind of information. There's a point in which the community stops believing in its government and what it's doing for them, And an expansionist government is only left with the tools that it has created. And the US's greatest export is death. It's war and it's weapons. And so the only resource that they have to contain our discontent is to bring back empire into the interior. But what I would argue is that that has been perfected over time. What we're seeing here is something that has been happening for a long time. And what makes us less able to push back is the fact that we are economically, collectively unsafe. Because imagine a reality.
And it's getting worse because people are about to be kicked off. I believe there's a work requirement hitting people on food stamps in the next, I don't know, several months or weeks. I don't know.
Yeah.
And at the end of, after the elections, people are going to start having if they haven't had their premiums raised already by defunding in order to like fund tax cuts and the ICE budget, after the election this year, people are going to start getting kicked off of Medicaid.
Yes, and that allows the system to continue to ask more of us for less and less. And so one of the beautiful things that I'll highlight to connect it to this point is how well the community has organized itself, both around the physical safety of our neighbors, but also mutual aid, food, walking kids to schools, all of that. And the question that I would encourage people to ask themselves is, what kind of government is that modeling, where the privileged gather their resources and redistribute them across the masses?
Are we talking about socialism?
I would describe it as a democratized economy. And
Democratic socialism?
no, just the economy. And socialism isn't just like an economic proposition.
You're not pushing socialism on me, are you?
I firmly stand by us democratizing our economy here in Minneapolis. And I would make the argument, plain and simple. If you take the things that people are needing the most right now, healthcare, guaranteed housing, a universal income, utilities, access to internet so people can go to school remotely, like our kiddos who are staying at home. You take the system that the community is modeling and you codify it, you make it a permanent fixture. These kinds of things are less likely to happen. Not the agency arriving, but the economic insecurity that leads to these problems of not being able to pay for rent, facing eviction, not necessarily being able to have easy access to, being able to afford groceries, or watching businesses sort of go down. Making that kind of system that we've modeled as a community permanent would build durability and sustainability. I would also argue that it gives people the power and privilege to stand out in nonviolent acts of resistance. Because if your healthcare is not tied to your employer, then it's easier for you to go on strike.
Right.
Or present at a protest.
So I want to acknowledge for the audience that it's very weird that the Wedge Live podcast is getting into these issues. But so are you arguing that Minneapolis, so first question, maybe this is a short answer, is Minneapolis different than other places? You've lived in other places. Do you think the reaction we're seeing in Minneapolis is just what any community would do to defend itself? Or do you think there is something about Minneapolis culture that has fostered this?
I would say not necessarily, because this has been happening in Portland, Maine, or Chicago, Illinois, in other places.
But I think we've become the example of how to do it best, and maybe it's because we've learned from the other places, and maybe it's because the crackdown has involved more troops from the federal government than those other places. And so the reaction we're seeing in Minneapolis is simply in proportion to the level of violence being inflicted. But so you're saying you don't think necessarily we're all that different from other places?
I think every city and community will have its own personality if this ends up happening. And that's something that I would also argue. It's like, there's another article I would recommend. It's a short read by Chris Hedges called The Last Election. He was a wartime reporter who talks about the idea of governments essentially propping up elections that don't mean anything, and governments where their ruler stays in position for an extended period of time. And so I think that part of what's happening here right now is different approaches to trying to take over the electoral process and either turn it into something that's like fully irrelevant or eliminated altogether. And so we will see how other cities respond. I like to think that there's something unique about Minneapolis, and I feel very proud of what people have done. What the reason why I'm pointing it out is because when we start talking about it from an economics perspective, it might make people's hair kind of spike a little bit, but I would just say you're modeling the kind of government that would make this community more resilient to things like this, because like I said, the initial impact of an act of terror or an act of war is the violence, but what's left over is what makes it really hard for communities to recuperate. If you have coded an economic safety net so that people can benefit from it no matter what happens, it essentially says we're a little bit better protected, we're more resilient and more durable, and this economic fallout wouldn't be so hard on our communities when the time comes.
So are you saying this is Minneapolis is an example for the nation to follow, or are you saying this is a thing for state and local government to follow?
No, absolutely. And I would say that there are a couple of things that I would add, because again, I do think the nation should look in and take lessons from what happened. I mean, the way people were organized around patrolling and safety, and the way people have organized around helping their neighbors and delivering groceries, repurposing their spaces to take donations, collecting donations to help with rent, I think is an incredible example. What I would argue is like, let's take it further and look at our elected officials to adopt things like this, so that the burden doesn't continue to fall on people who are week after week able to fundraise less and less. Right. You know,
I'm imagining the first time we come upon someone suggesting like a local income tax. I'm imagining once we get back to normal politics, and some far out wacky socialist is like, let's do a little bit of an income tax on high earners locally, because budgets are tight, and we need this money, and the backlash that we will see from even DFLers.
Yeah. So I wanna read you something, and you can make fun of me for it.
Oh, are we gonna be doing reading? Are you going to read extended passages from your phone?
Story time.
How long?
It's not that long.
Okay.
So this is Jason Hickel, who's a historian, economist, political commentator. But I think it's really important to talk about, because we never get to use what he describes as our productive capacities for innovation that does good to the community. We are always limited by a system that forces us to be productive on behalf of capital. So anyway, he says, liberalism has got two major commitments. One hand, it's a commitment to human rights, and the other, the rule of law, individual freedoms, and the other, it's committed to capital. And this is essential to liberal ideology, that processes of production are controlled by capital and maintaining the conditions for capital accumulation. The problem, which we're kind of experiencing here, is when these things come into conflict, then liberal leaders will resolve the contradiction in favor of capital accumulation. And this is what explains that liberals have this reputation of being hypocrites. They are full of spectacular contradictions. You get people who are committed to liberal rights, then openly backing a genocide. And what happens is that, crucially, liberals are anti-socialist, and they'll do everything possible to crush actual progressive socialist movements, because their ultimate, most important commitment, which is capital accumulation, they will never let that be threatened. And so he makes an example about Bernie Sanders and how they essentially crushed him out of the primaries, and then says, when you're crushing socialist movements and you're also crumbling and failing, which is what's happening with the left now, it leaves a political vacuum open to the far right. liberalism gives way to fascism over and over and over, like clockwork. Fascist core principles are also capital accumulation, but they dispense of the liberal values. Liberals are actually more comfortable handing power over to the far right because they're confident that at least capital is going to be protected. And so I think that's the important thing for me in terms of how I think about what's happening here is that we know what will actually work for the masses. Like it's this concept of we can all be successful at the same time in such a way, but we have to rethink the way in which we're built around an economy that works for many other people, and that I think does build resilience against things like this that have happened. And more than that, I think there's a seriousness that we have to kind of take on as it relates to what impact they're trying to have on the electoral process.
Who's they?
The federal government, as they're showing up here to these communities. Because, for example,
I think we're teaching them a lesson. And I don't think they're going to try this large-scale violent crackdown in other cities going forward. I think maybe they want to try this around polling places, but there's so much early voting now that, like, as soon as you try to, they would have to do it. They'd have to mess with early voting too, right? I think when you start telling people you can't vote, people are like, no, I really want to vote now. Like there's an element of this with like voter suppression tactics in southern states where people are like, no, I want to vote more because you're telling me I can't.
But there's a question there, and this is, you touched on this, which I think is really important. It's like, you talked about it across the racial spectrum, like what awareness does a privileged white person have of the disenfranchisement that people have experienced over the years? And so it's just not enough to ask people to vote. You have to give them something to vote for. Mm-hmm. And what people in this country have experienced for decades has been a gradual disenfranchisement of an economy that works for them.
Yeah.
And you see it in turnout. That voter turnout is hampered by the fact that people don't identify with either party anymore. In my community, for example, here in North Minneapolis, that is a prevalent perspective. And so asking people to vote...
How do you like Pearl Warren? Is Pearl Warren your council member?
Yes.
Congratulations.
I don't know anything about Pearl Warren.
Have you not heard of her, recent performances at the city council?
No, I haven't.
Oh, she was...
Yeah.
She couldn't vote for the resolution calling for not funding immigration enforcement at the federal level because, and then she says she quoted a song about, she mentioned one-eyed people eaters with 3 hairs on their head. You're a musician, maybe you're familiar with the song One-Eyed Purple People Eaters?
I'm not.
But if either one of our lives were in danger and there was someone who was from wherever, I wouldn't care where they were from, the land of one-eyed people eaters, and they had 3 hairs on top of their head. If they're doing something crazy that's not okay and doesn't, promote them being a healthy and contributing citizen to society, I'm going to protect you all from it too. So I can't say no.
She says she was quoting that. And then she had to apologize to our friend Soren Stevenson, the Ward 8 council member, because he has one eye.
Yeah, it's pretty inappropriate. I think another thing I'll say that I think is remarkable, both good and bad, is that as of this moment, we'll see what actually gets dispersed. It seems like the community has out-fundraised the city and the state.
Are you upset at the city? Do you think the city's not doing enough? I'm a little sympathetic to the idea that the city budget does not have the capacity to meet the need. Are we sympathetic to that at least? They have approved a $7 million small business funding, the $1 million rental assistance thing. So what more could they be doing?
What's the need?
Oh, it's vast.
Right, what's the need?
Endless.
I think the way I look at it is, I work in advocacy. I think I will separate the city council from the mayor in this particular instance.
What has struck me is that I could sense that there are members of the city council who did not at all want to vote for for these assistance measures. And they voted for it anyway because it would be so politically toxic to vote against the assistance in a time of great need. Even though I think it's, it's debatable that like whether the city can afford this. And Elliot Payne has said essentially he does not care about the city's credit rating when we're effectively in a civil war with the federal government. Like, what does your credit rating matter?
Yeah, like I don't deny the fact that if it's not in the budget, it puts a lot of pressure on the city. But I think that it's both what could they be doing and what could they have done. And it goes back to the kinds of measures that I'm describing. It's like they've always had an opportunity. You could talk about rent control, TOPA, municipal banking, municipal IDs, things. I think there was a pilot UBI program in the city. So it's somewhere in a city website or maybe the county or whatever. These are things that people have been asking for decades. And I think it's important to look back at what has happened that has led to the point. And that's why I wanted to read that, is because we're just sort of in this cycle of protecting capital, and now that vacuum has been filled. But if we replace it with something that redistributes and democratizes an economy, we don't have to go back to that cycle. So that they don't have enough right now, fine and fair. But the other piece of it too is like accountability. Why has Governor Walz not moved forward with an eviction moratorium? It's like I don't personally see any political fallout with that. But then you start to look at little things for me. So I'll make one example, not to draw it out. I think it was last year there was something in the news that BlackRock bought out one of our, I think, electricity utility providers. And these things have to go through the governor's office. They have to give the okay there. And it's like, we are dealing with a liberal class of people that are catering to capital rather than to community. And sometimes we have to look at the economic decisions that they're making to understand who they really are. Because similarly, I would argue that Jacob Frey, when he was running for mayor, he brought in, or I would say softened the ground for the kind of xenophobia that is now being assigned to Donald Trump against our East African community members. But when he was running for mayor, I would describe some of the things that they were doing in the campaign as xenophobic towards Muslim East African people.
Talking about their criticism of Omar Fateh.
Yes. And so we have to be willing to look inward as people who think of ourselves as part of the left in allowing individuals and the system itself to send a message or create levers that are now being pulled by the other side. Similarly, there was an opportunity there, speaking of kind of a transportation measure, to support our drivers as workers, right? There was legislation at the Capitol, and that was vetoed by the governor. And that would have directly impacted the community members that are now struggling.
Are we talking about rideshare drivers?
Yes, and increasing their wages.
Well, they ultimately approved.
Well, here in the city,
something.
here the city did something which I felt like was effective, but Walz pushed back. I think it was Omar Fateh who was moving that bill at the Capitol. And I think the important thing to highlight is that what does it say about these people and who are representing our values, but not necessarily representing our economic needs in order for us to be more resilient.
Nationally, we see all the tech billionaires catering. Jeff Bezos was not defending the First Amendment when he bought the Washington Post, it turns out. He's not a benevolent billionaire. They're all catering to this and not standing up against it, despite the fact that they have all the privilege and ability in the world to say, well, I'm safe. I can speak freely against this. They're not. And did you see that Chamber of Commerce statement locally that basically said nothing? It's like, why can't both sides just come together? And I think
Yeah, because what they're
I think
saying
people
is
have the sense that the capitalists and the Chamber of Commerce class are not coming to save us. I hope.
no, and I think that's the other important thing to say is like the aftermath of war is obviously like people really struggle, but the other is that everything is on sale. And that's why I want to make the example of BlackRock. It's like instead of localizing our utilities or providing it through the municipality, you're giving it away. Well, in Puerto Rico, as an example, the fiscal control board that was placed on Puerto Rico brought a company that has no experience with utilities, and they're constantly facing blackouts. And the first time they've ever kind of apologized publicly was after Bad Bunny did his show.
Well, Jose, are you proud of me that immediately during that halftime show when he climbed up the electric poles, I knew immediately the reference
Yes,
that was a reference to after the hurricane, people left without power and just generally left without, good public services or assistance from the United States government, which they are a part of.
Yeah, so I am proud of you for noticing that, and we have to, I think, make the important point that what the Chamber of Commerce did. I think you made two important points. So like at the local level, I think there was a cohort of businesses that sent out like $3.5 million or something. And I remember reading, someone reposted it and said, "Did you mean billion?" It's like, it's to their benefit in a way, and that's the problem. It's not about being cynical, but those vacancies that may be left are to their benefit. That's how oligarchy works.
The commercial vacancies, you mean?
Yeah, or even housing, that they can come in and then
Buy things up for cheap.
and then turn them around for profit.
What is this called? Disaster capitalism? Is that what this is called?
Yeah, you could call it that. I use the word oligarchy just because I'm making the distinction between left and right. Sort of like left capitalism is slow upward transfer of wealth. It's like they would come in and turn it into an Airbnb. Oligarchy is more turbocharged. It's like buy it and then sell it for profit and leave it there for whatever it might become.
Jose, this is why I have a podcast about very local politics, because I don't know who to call about any of this stuff. I don't know who to send an email to. I don't know what to do. I don't know what street to stand in to make a difference for any of these things.
Yeah, no, and I think we connect a couple things too. Like, that's the thing. It's like, I do feel like it's asking too much of the community, but that's sort of where we're at. It's like we have to learn to walk, chew gum, take care of each other, and stir the pot. And part of my argument is that that pressure that the community is applying should be about economic measures. But at that level, like you were talking about Bad Bunny in that show, these things are connected, what's happening nationally and abroad and here. And sometimes I think it's good to look around at what's happened in other places because, he kind of made this argument of hyper-nationalism in that show by basically saying America is not a nation. It is a continent made up of many nations, most of which who speak Spanish, right? And so...
Did you cry during that halftime show? I cried a little.
No, but
No?
I mean,
It didn't
it was
touch
very,
your heart?
It was very touching. I mean, there are things there that, like, I will just continue to say I have a lot of privilege. But I lived in Puerto Rico after a hurricane where we didn't have power and water for months. And, it was kind of makeshift. And we eventually had to start going to school. And I think part of what he did that made me feel very emotional. It is a big part of the work that I do as a musician, uplifting the Puerto Rican diaspora here in Minnesota and working with composers who want to write about Puerto Rico, is that several months after those hurricanes went through, the news cycle just turned away, but the needs took years and years, and it was exacerbating needs that already existed for decades. And I appreciate the fact that he's using his platform not just to elevate our culture, but to elevate the issues that are at least in his periphery, to talk about in a way that get people to think a little bit differently, and meaningfully or not, I don't know, can put pressure on the system to respond. As we speak, Puerto Rico has a governor that's very friendly to this federal administration, and I believe that they are making some investments in airports. Like Puerto Rico is being used, for example, when Maduro was taken from Venezuela, they brought him to Puerto Rico. And like I was saying earlier, Border Patrol is in Puerto Rico. The U.S. border is in Puerto Rico. And they do the same thing to people who are coming from other islands to Puerto Rico to try to make their way into the U.S. And so it isn't about necessarily ignoring the local impacts. I think sometimes it's just understanding the broader issue to get a sense of how to respond.
Well, I was touched and I cried, and because it's easy to feel like everyone is what you see in the media, like the cruelty and the hatred and the fact that we voted for this as a country. We voted for this. A majority of people, either out of ignorance or apathy, just voted for it, and you can feel alone. As a white man, I sometimes feel alone, like the whole country has lost its mind, and like it was nice to see all those flags.
Yeah, because there's nothing,
Just like a basic kindergarten level display of the flags of the Americas brought a tear to my eye, because, my partner is represented by one of those flags. And you can often feel like the world is against you and it hates you.
I think that's one of the most important things that we all have to remember, is that joy and positive visioning is not negligence towards the things that we're experiencing. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited about Open Streets coming back. But what Bad Bunny did, he's choosing to use his large platform to put something that's powerful enough to get people out of the seats in a way that they feel like they're fighting for themselves in something better. If you come out and you say, this person is bad, vote for me, or this person is bad, support this, you're not filling the vacuum.
It's going to work this year, though. It'll work for the midterms. It's not like a long-term plan, but like getting people to vote against what's happening now is going to be very easy politics. Yeah. But it's not going to be sustainable in filling the vacuum and preventing this from just continuing to flare up and handing off power, and eventually, you're swirling down the toilet bowl towards, something much worse than what we're experiencing now.
It's rinse and repeat.
Jose, are you giving concerts about the Puerto Rican diaspora?
I did in January at the History Center. So the project.
Oh, right. That does say January, doesn't it? So we're not plugging an event that you can go to.
No.
This is something that has happened.
You can listen to the recording. It's called Pedacito de Tierra, and it features 5 Puerto Ricans from our Minnesota community talking about their stories of either being from or coming to the United States. I think the exhibit is still at the History Center, and then there's a digital story map. But we did present this at the History Center, the Cedar, and then a couple of other locations in St. Paul and Illinois. But I think the reason why to talk about feeling emotional, the night before the first concert was when this person was shot in the neighborhood, just a couple blocks down.
Right, they shot through a front door. It lied about it being self-defense, ICE did, and shot a guy through the front door.
Yeah, so there was a question of like, are people going to show up? Who's going to show up? How are they going to feel? Taking precautions, there were artists coming in from out of town. It was interesting to read the reactions, because at the History Center they have to take surveys, and it was a mix of like, it was heavy. people responded in different ways, but I think the Pedacito de Tierra, which Angelica Negron wrote and we recorded, if you strip away the fact that these are members of the Puerto Rican community, there are really important themes of immigration there. You would hear things like, who am I? Where do I belong? People being treated like they're not intelligent because English is their second language. Someone told a story about living in Dade County in Florida, and a Puerto Rican person getting arrested for dating a white woman. But then we surrounded it with music of the Americas, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Argentina, Brazil. And I think, we were able to go through this sort of separation from the moment while at the same time sort of like working through it collectively. And I was doubting whether we should do the concerts or postpone them, but it ended up being a really positive experience for us as performers, and I think for the audience to take a moment to whether work through emotions, reflect, take a break from organizing, get away from the noise, leave the house for a minute, whatever it might be. But you asked me how I was. I probably should have said that then. That was definitely part of my experience, is like everything was kind of colliding, and we were in the middle of delivering this thing which feels relevant to what's happening, but obviously it was more of an artistic and conceptual project. One of the things that I do regret is that we were doing like a preview concert at the History Center at noon the day before, and we were bringing in students with Latin American heritage that were supposed to like get bussed over to listen to it and ask questions and have a more interactive kind of open rehearsal, and we were just not able to do that. And so I feel like, in a way, we kind of owe it to them to do it at some point, because those are the questions that they ask themselves as young people of color who are immigrant here in this community, is like, where is my sense of belonging? And for them to come to an experience that wrestles with those questions and obviously puts them in a musical setting, I think would have been great. And to get that youth perspective, whether it's your first generation or second generation, and as part of a young people's community.
I can't wait till we get back to fighting over like bike lanes, like street reconstructions. Can't wait to hear from people again about how this or that street reconstruction is the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Because we're currently living through something that feels very apocalyptic. And last year and the year before, it was like, this Hennepin Avenue street reconstruction is destroying everything. It's the literal end of the world. And I can't wait till our politics is that again.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's emblematic. It's like it's another thing that I've been thinking about a lot, which is that our relationship to government can't be seasonal. And you asked me earlier examples from other countries. Something that happened in Puerto Rico, which is very interesting, is that they ousted a governor because the entire island just set foot and marched over to the capital. So it was like, it could have been over 1 million people, I don't actually know. And they just clogged it up until this person resigned. But oftentimes, here in the United States, the spectacle of the electoral process is so addictive that then we have few of us left for the actual accountability that needs to happen after elections are done. And if we can simultaneously work, in my view, towards a democratized economy, but also a culture whose relationship to government is that of consistent accountability, these things would happen less. That these kinds of demonstrations that we've seen happen are something that city council members or members of the county board can expect if something is not right. I think that would also bring forward a new set of candidates who are more responsive to that kind of engagement and wouldn't feel threatened by it. But I think we have to let go of this idea that if we just participate in the electoral process, that's enough. we need to carve out time out of our lives as community members to fight for each other anytime after any election during any period and say, I have some privilege, I have some financial and time privilege. This is wrong. I know I voted for this person, but I'm going to go stand up for my community members and tell this person that I voted for that I don't agree with you, and I'm going to make an effort to organize my neighbors to make sure that they do something about it. If that can become part of our culture, that kind of culture of accountability, speaking of streets, it's like, if we can look at our infrastructure as an opportunity to build communities where people can both afford and have the space privilege to push back against things that might harm or disrupt the kind of stability that we want to achieve, that's durability in my view, and that's something, you got me thinking about that because you're like, I can't wait to get back to fighting about streets. No, I just think that's a good point. Is like, there should be more of you, and people should take that as an example for what we ought to be doing, which is like, don't just show up for the one thing. If you have privilege, make it your responsibility to consistently show up on behalf of things. So I like the way you're saying it, because I'm like, I feel the same way. It's like, when this is over, which is not over, right? But when this transitions into whatever it's going to transition, I'm still going to be working in advocacy. And if I'm not working in advocacy, I'm still going to participate in the kind of community building that is needed in order for us to maintain some level of accountability. And if we could collectively participate in this, that's the thing that we always have to remember. There are always more of us than there are them. And if we come together, they will have to listen.
So David Brower posted this thing to Blue Sky. I've totally lost control of this episode. It's so long that I'm just going to keep going. Some observers had an interaction with ICE agents, and the ICE agents were telling them, like, the response time in South Minneapolis to ICE activity is like 2 minutes. Some insanely low number. Like, as soon as ICE is spotted, in 2 minutes, people show up to hassle them. Mm-hmm. And you hear about, like, well, the suburbs, and I feel really bad for people who are doing this kind of activism and, like, standing up for people in the suburbs and the exurbs, because they're alone, right? They live in places that maybe voted majority for Trump. They can't count on the fact that the people who live next to them are on their side, are friendly. Like, not only are they against the ICE agents, but they have to worry, like, are my neighbors against me, kind of thing? Yeah. And it's got me thinking about how, like, cities are a refuge for people, right? Not necessarily in the, what's the term? Why is the term escaping me? Sanctuary city sense? But, like, it's a place for you to be safe in a community that respects you in a similar way that, like, gay people would come to cities historically to be safe, to live in a community with each other and not suffer from as much violence as they would in wherever they came from. People talk about moving to Minnesota because we are friendly to trans people. You see that a lot. Friendlier. There's something to be said for, and this is easy for me, this is very brave of me to say because it aligns with my politics, but, like, people putting up the trash barricades, that's traffic calming, right? Making it harder for people from outside to just speed through your neighborhood, smash and grab someone and take them, or advocating for more housing so that, we can accommodate all the people who need to live here just to be safe. I don't know. There's something about being pro-city in this moment that feels relevant and important.
Yeah, I think you're talking about abundance. Sometimes the word that comes up with housing is the idea of density. Mm-hmm. I would also describe it as proximity and accessibility and acceptance, because we have to include those people. It's like, even if you just think about it from the point of view of, like, going from A to B in a situation like this, I live in a neighborhood where I don't have that proximity. And because I'm uncomfortable using transit, now I have to depend on a driver or somebody to take me somewhere. What I would say, I listened to someone, this really touched me because she was, I think, talking to some independent press or something about, which is part of the reason why I'm using Facebook more, is to kind of keep up with what's happening now, because I like using the platform for my own purposes. But like, she talked about the amount of nationalities that the state of Minnesota represents. And I, you know, as probably a white person of privilege, this person, you know, is really emotionally thinking about the connection that she's felt and the pride that she feels in this community. What I would say is, let's take it further. Let's fight for the economic securities that these people need in order for us to live equally, not just across the rainbow spectrum or the racial spectrum, but the economic spectrum. Give us the opportunity to live like you in ways that would afford us the kind of security that we need to be able to walk out into the world and enjoy a quality of life that has been primarily afforded to wealthy white people or people of privilege. And to take your point, you know, you talk about density. I think about this all the time. Like, public transit has worked really well when it's fare free in the places where it has been piloted for many reasons, right? So it's important for us to talk about density and proximity. Like, we want more frequent bus stops, we want dedicated bus lanes. But another part of accessibility is removing the cost barrier. That would impact the same people that are really struggling right now. And I would say the same thing about housing, is like, if you build density alone, to make that sort of a one-to-one comparison, you also need measures to protect people from getting pushed out during that process, and also measures to allow people to climb that economic ladder and find that kind of stability. And in my view, those always have to go hand in hand. And if we can essentially do what liberals haven't been doing, which is decouple, they couple liberalism with capitalism. If we could decouple capitalism and couple it with a democratized economy, real economic rights, now that durability and that sustainability is afforded to everyone across that racial spectrum. And that's the most interesting intersection. So I see this like these acts of love and these acts of joy and these acts of resistance, if we could just continue to move them in that direction, I think we will have something very interesting. And I do think we could become a national model. And to your specific point, personally, as an artist, I would also add, I know that's a different spectrum, but I have felt more welcome in this community. There's more for me to do and contribute as an artist. So this is, to your point about living in a core city, like this is a community that has given me the opportunity to express myself differently to when I lived in a college town or a small rural town or whatever it is. You can use it or not. I'm going to end on a reading by
Oh my God. Are you going to scold us?
No, I'm not.
We're almost at 90 minutes, Jose.
Martin
People are
Luther
tired.
King Jr.
Or you?
Martin Luther King Jr., one of my favorites.
Is he going to be going after the white moderate? Is that what we're going to be doing? That's what you're, okay. Look how well read I am.
Yeah.
I recognize it immediately.
I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block is in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And you know, he kind of essentially died isolated. I think he was like at a garbage workers strike in Tennessee. And one of the things he would say towards the end of life was that we can't have civil rights if we don't have economic rights. And as he started talking more and more about economic rights, the left separated from him more and more. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about, because these are the people who primarily represent us right now. And we have to think about different people and different solutions to bring about durable change.
The idea, discomfort with direct action in that quote, like that's what direct action, all the people in the city who were uncomfortable with the past handful of years or more of direct action, like that's what's been protective.
Yeah.
Like people willing to take to the streets and do something, the people who saved us.
They're our neighbors. Yeah, it's our community. They are putting our elected officials to shame. They are out hustling and out working, because these people are also parents and employees, some of which may not have the same kind of stability. We even had a board member at our streets who was boxed in. Like, this is a person of color, recognizably easy to racially profile. And guess what? He's still doing moving aid around. Like, he's going out and taking those risks because he feels like there are people with even less privilege.
Thank you for having me in your home for an episode of the Wedge Live podcast.
Thank you for coming to North Minneapolis.
José Antonio Zayas Cabán.
John Edwards.
Grammy nominated? Grammy award winning? Which is it?
Haven't won one, just 2 nominations.
Puerto Rican superstar over here. And I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Did Cornel West run as a member of the Green Party for president? Was
I
that
think-
what he did?
I think he
can't remember
switched a few
why I'm
times.
irritated at Cornel West.
I think he switched a few times.
It feels like he went off the deep end.
But he also makes another important point. I listened to him do an interview on CNN. He talks about the niggeriization of the country, and the way he describes it, he likes to use these sort of like comparisons. He's like, the injustice and the oppression that has always lived on the chocolate side of the street has now moved over to the vanilla side of the street. And so now we're facing a moment.
I'm very uncomfortable with some of the phrases you're using, Jose.